The war in South Africa from 1899 to 1902 was the first overseas war that Canada sent troops to as a nation. Some 7,000 Canadian volunteers fought in the war. 270 lost their lives. Our letter from this war was from an Ottawa-born volunteer, George Dore, who was living in Pincher Creek, Alberta, when he signed up with the 2nd Battalion, Canadian Mounted Rifles. Dear Mother, I suppose you will be wondering what has happened to me, as I have not written for such a long time. The last time I wrote, we were at Kronstadt. Since then, we have marched right up past Pretoria, but it is of no use my telling you about the war. You know more about the war at home than we do who are out here. We had some very hard fighting getting into Johannesburg, in which I was wounded in the leg with a piece of shell. Nothing much of a wound, but enough to put me out of action for a while. We were under fire before Johannesburg for 3 days, a terrible shell fire. General Hutton's brigade, that's the one we are in, had to keep the enemy engaged while the others got around to their flank or rear. It was on the 3rd day of the fighting that I was hit about 11 a.m. There were a great many wounded and quite a few killed, and a great many horses. I had to ride my horse about 2 miles before I could get to the nearest ambulance. They're never at the front where they're wanted. I was very fully faint when I got in, but managed to stick it out. There was not a doctor or a Red Cross man within 2 miles of the fighting line, and lots of good fellows that could not get off the field themselves had to lie there and bleed to death. It was a shame, and the Red Cross Society will be shown up in its true colors when we all get back. Well, as soon as I got off the field, I was thrown onto a bullock wagon along with a lot more wounded, and we started back over the longest roads I've ever went over to Klipburnt Station, about 12 miles away, but it seemed as 100. I wonder we did not all bleed to death before we got there. It was a terrible ride. We got to the station about 10 o'clock at night and had to lie out in the wagons all night without blankets or anything to eat. We were nearly all froze to death, for it is the middle of winter here now, and it freezes hard every night. The next day, we were put into an empty house and some sheds. There were about 80 wagon loads of us altogether, some terribly wounded. We stopped there 3 days, and then we were brought down here in coal trucks and have been here ever since. The Boers got around to our lee and blew up the railroad between Kronstadt and here, and so as to cut us off from the base of supplies. We have all been on 1/4 rations since then. But the Boers have been driven back, and the line was reported clear yesterday, so everything will soon be all right again. Indeed, by the time you get this, we may be on our way home, as I think the war is pretty nearly over, although there are a lot of small parties here and there causing a lot of trouble. With love to all, I remain your loving son, George L. Dore. But the war was far from over. Those small parties of Boer soldiers would wage a successful guerrilla war against the armies of the British Empire for 2 more years before finally conceding defeat. George Dore was invalided home in early 1901. He received the Queen's Medal with 4 clasps for his service.